The search for meaning. How to find meaning in life when everything feels empty. There is a particular kind of suffering that does not scream. It does not arrive as tragedy, poverty, or visible catastrophe. It arrives quietly, as emptiness. You wake up, you function, you work, scroll, respond, survive the day. And yet, beneath all of it, something feels missing. Not broken, missing. No clear pain, no dramatic despair. Just a dull sense that life has lost its weight, its direction, its reason. This is the condition Viktor Frankl would later describe as the existential vacuum. Not depression in the clinical sense, not anxiety in the classic sense, but a deep inner void where meaning used to live. Frankl observed that this state does not come from suffering alone. It often appears when suffering disappears, when survival is no longer the problem, and the question becomes, why am I doing any of this? Modern life is exceptionally good at keeping us busy, but catastrophically bad at telling us why. You can have comfort without purpose, freedom without direction, pleasure without fulfillment. And when meaning is absent, the human psyche does not remain neutral. It searches, it compensates, it numbs itself. Frankl noticed that when meaning is missing, people do not simply feel empty. They try to fill the void with substitutes. Pleasure, power, achievement, distraction, endless stimulation. But these substitutes never satisfy for long. They quiet the question without answering it, and the question always returns. What is the point of this life? What am I here for? Why do I feel empty even when nothing is technically wrong? Frankl warned that this vacuum is one of the greatest psychological dangers of modern civilization, not because it causes immediate collapse, but because it slowly erodes the will to live. When a person cannot identify why they exist, how they exist becomes unbearable. This is why people surrounded by opportunity can feel more lost than those fighting to survive. This is why despair can grow in comfort. This is why emptiness often appears after success, not before it. Frankl's insight was radical for its time and deeply uncomfortable today. Meaning is not something you receive from the world. It is something you are called to respond to. Life is not asking, "What do you want from me?" Life is asking, "What do I demand of you?" This is where most people turn away, because responding to life requires responsibility. And responsibility feels heavy when the soul is already tired. But Frankl was clear. The absence of meaning is not a personal failure. It is a signal that the old answers no longer work, a signal that the psyche is ready for a deeper orientation. Not pleasure, not success, but purpose. Before meaning can be found, the illusion must collapse. The illusion that happiness is the goal. The illusion that fulfillment comes from accumulation. The illusion that emptiness means something is wrong with you. Emptiness is not the enemy. It is the space where the real question finally becomes audible. And that question, uncomfortable, quiet, unavoidable, is where the search for meaning truly begins. Viktor Frankl made a distinction that modern psychology often avoids. He separated mental illness from existential frustration. To feel empty does not automatically mean something is psychologically wrong. Often it means something is existentially unanswered. Frankl observed that many people seeking therapy were not ill in the clinical sense. They were not delusional. They were not irrational. They were not broken. They were unoriented. They had lost contact with what Frankl called the will to meaning, the primary motivational force of the human being. Freud believed humans are driven by the will to pleasure. Adler emphasized the will to power. Frankl did not deny either, but he argued they become dominant only when meaning is blocked. When meaning is present, pleasure and power fall into their proper place. When meaning is absent, they become desperate substitutes. This is why the empty person often says, "I don't know what I want. I don't care anymore. Nothing really matters." Not because nothing matters, but because meaning cannot be manufactured on demand. Frankl insisted on a difficult truth. Meaning is not created arbitrarily. It is discovered through confrontation with life. And here lies the modern conflict. We are trained to believe that if something feels uncomfortable, it must be eliminated. If a feeling persists, it must be medicated. If a question has no immediate answer, it must be avoided. But existential questions are not symptoms. They are invitations. The feeling of emptiness is life pressing against the individual, demanding orientation, demanding direction, demanding responsibility. Frankl warned that when society teaches people to chase happiness instead of meaning, it creates fragile individuals, people who collapse the moment happiness disappears. Because happiness is a byproduct, meaning is a foundation. A meaningful life can endure suffering. A pleasurable life cannot. This explains why emptiness often deepens during periods of comfort, not crisis. When survival is no longer required, meaning is exposed or revealed as missing. Frankl saw this clearly in post-war society. People were no longer starving, no longer imprisoned, no longer fighting for survival. Yet suicide rates rose, addictions spread, apathy became common, not because life was too hard, but because life no longer demanded anything clear from the individual. Without a task, a responsibility, or a purpose beyond the self, the psyche turns inward and begins to decay. This is why Frankl rejected the idea that meaning is something you invent to feel better. Meaning is not a coping mechanism. It is a response to life's concrete demands. And emptiness in this context is not a diagnosis. It is a crossroads. One path leads to distraction, numbing, and resignation. The other leads to responsibility, tension, and growth. Frankl believed tension is not the enemy of mental health. Meaningful tension, between who you are and what life asks of you, is essential. Remove all tension, and you do not create peace, you create stagnation. The existential vacuum is life saying, your current way of living is no longer sufficient. Not as punishment, but as an invitation to step into a deeper alignment with reality. Only when this signal is understood, not suppressed, can the search for meaning move forward. One of Viktor Frankl's most uncomfortable insights is also one of the most misunderstood. Meaning does not come from self-analysis. It does not emerge from endless introspection. It is not found by asking, what do I want from life? Frankl argued that this question is fundamentally inverted. Life is not an object to be interrogated by the individual. Life is the one asking. The modern individual is encouraged to look inward for answers, to scan emotions, desires, preferences, identities. But Frankl observed something paradoxical. The more a person fixates on the self, the emptier they become. Why? Because meaning is not self-referential. The human being finds meaning not by focusing on fulfillment, but by forgetting the self in service of something beyond it. Frankl called this principle self-transcendence. The human psyche is not designed to revolve around itself. When it does, it collapses inward. This is why people who obsess over happiness rarely feel fulfilled. Why those who chase purpose directly often feel lost. Why constant self-optimization leads to exhaustion instead of clarity. Meaning emerges as a side effect, never as a direct target. Frankl stated this with precision. The more one forgets himself, by giving himself to a cause to serve or another person to love, the more human he is. This idea runs counter to modern culture. We are told to prioritize ourselves, protect our energy, center our needs, optimize our satisfaction. But Frankl saw that this inward orientation produces fragility. When life inevitably disappoints, there is nothing solid to stand on. Meaning, by contrast, anchors the individual to something that suffering cannot erase. Frankl identified three primary ways meaning appears in human life: through work or creation, contributing something meaningful to the world, through love or encounter, fully experiencing another human being, through attitude toward unavoidable suffering, choosing one's stance when nothing can be changed. Notice what is missing from this list: comfort, pleasure, personal happiness. Meaning is not about feeling good. It is about being responsible. Responsibility, in Frankl's view, is the essence of meaning. Not responsibility imposed by society, but responsibility revealed by life itself. At every moment, life presents a unique demand. No one else can answer it for you, and it will never be asked again in the same form. This is why meaning cannot be generalized or outsourced. It is always concrete, always specific, always personal. When everything feels empty, the mistake is often searching for an internal feeling that will restore motivation. Frankl would say, "Stop asking how you feel about life. Start asking what life is asking of you, now." The answer will rarely feel inspiring at first. It may feel heavy, unfair, demanding. But meaning does not begin with inspiration. It begins with responsibility, accepted in spite of resistance. The moment the question shifts from "what can I get?" to "what is required of me?" the existential vacuum begins to loosen its grip. Not because life suddenly feels easy, but because it feels directed. And direction, even under strain, is psychologically stabilizing. This is the turning point Frankl identified. Meaning is not discovered by turning inward, but by stepping outward, toward task, toward person, toward fate. Only then does life regain weight. Viktor Frankl was explicit about one point that modern discourse often avoids. Suffering is not inherently meaningful. Pain, loss, illness, injustice, none of these carry meaning by themselves. They only acquire meaning through the attitude taken toward them. Frankl rejected the romanticization of suffering. He never claimed that pain is good, necessary, or desirable. What he insisted on was far more unsettling. When suffering is unavoidable, meaning becomes unavoidable as well. In Auschwitz, Frankl observed a brutal psychological truth. Those who believed life still expected something from them, a task unfinished, a person waiting, a responsibility not yet fulfilled, were more likely to survive psychologically and often physically. Those who believed nothing awaited them beyond the camp deteriorated rapidly. The camp stripped prisoners of everything external: status, possessions, identity, freedom. But one thing remained: the freedom to choose one's attitude. This freedom was fragile, limited, and constantly threatened. But it existed. Frankl called this the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's stance toward unavoidable fate. This idea is often misunderstood as passive acceptance. It is not. Choosing one's attitude is not resignation. It is resistance at the level of meaning. When no action can change circumstances, the inner position becomes the final domain of agency. Frankl saw that suffering without meaning leads to despair. But suffering with meaning, even unbearable suffering, becomes survivable. This is why people can endure pain for a reason, but collapse under pain that feels pointless. Meaning does not remove suffering. It changes its psychological weight. A person who understands why they suffer can endure almost anyhow. This is not a motivational slogan. It is an empirical observation Frankl made repeatedly. Importantly, Frankl stressed that no one has the right to tell another person what their suffering means. Meaning cannot be imposed from outside. Each situation demands a unique response. Each individual must answer life in their own way. In moments of extreme emptiness, people often wait for circumstances to improve before they feel motivated to live. Frankl inverted this logic. Life does not wait until conditions improve to demand meaning. It demands meaning precisely when conditions collapse. This is where many people feel betrayed by life. They believe suffering means something has gone wrong. Frankl argued the opposite. Suffering is often the moment when life becomes most urgent. Not because pain is sacred, but because it forces clarity. When everything optional is stripped away, what remains is what truly matters. The question shifts from "how can I avoid this?" to "who am I becoming through this?" Frankl warned that avoiding this question through numbing, distraction, or bitterness only prolongs suffering. But facing it, without illusion, without self-pity, restores inner dignity. Dignity does not come from control over circumstances. It comes from coherence between one's values and one's response. Even in situations of total helplessness, the individual retains the power to decide whether suffering will degrade them or deepen them. This does not make suffering good. It makes the human response to suffering meaningful. And when meaning enters, even darkness changes texture. It does not disappear, but it no longer feels empty. One of the most paralyzing myths about meaning is the belief that it must arrive as a grand revelation. People wait for clarity as if it were a sudden event, a calling, a passion, a moment of certainty that reorganizes everything. Viktor Frankl dismantled this expectation. Meaning rarely announces itself dramatically. It appears quietly, embedded in concrete demands of everyday life. Frankl emphasized that life does not present meaning in abstract terms. It presents tasks. Small, specific, unglamorous tasks. A responsibility toward a person. A commitment to work done with integrity. A decision to act ethically when no one is watching. These are not distractions from meaning. They are its primary form. Frankl observed that people who feel empty often overlook these demands because they do not feel inspiring. They want meaning to feel powerful, elevating, emotionally rewarding. But meaning is not measured by intensity. It is measured by responsibility fulfilled. This is why searching for purpose through constant emotional evaluation leads to paralysis. The question, "Do I feel motivated?" replaces the more important question, "What must be done?" Frankl argued that waiting for motivation before action reverses the natural order. Action precedes meaning. Responsibility precedes fulfillment. A person does not act because life feels meaningful. Life becomes meaningful because the person acts responsibly. This is especially relevant when everything feels empty. In such moments, the psyche demands clarity before movement. But clarity rarely comes first. Frankl would advise the opposite. Identify the smallest responsibility life is placing in front of you, and answer it, not because it feels significant, but because it is demanded. Meaning accumulates through alignment with reality, not through inspiration. This explains why people who endure long periods of emptiness often report that meaning returned gradually, almost unnoticed. They did not find themselves. They re-engaged with life through responsibility. Frankl warned against the obsession with finding a universal life purpose. There is no single meaning of life. There is only the meaning of this moment, and the next one, and the one after that. Each moment asks a different question. Each demands a different response. This perspective removes pressure. You are not required to solve your entire existence. You are required to answer what is in front of you, now. This is psychologically stabilizing. When life feels overwhelming, the mind collapses under abstraction. But responsibility is concrete. You can always identify something that must be done, even in suffering, even in limitation. Frankl believed this focus restores agency, not the illusion of control over life, but participation in it. Meaning grows where participation replaces passivity. And passivity, Frankl observed, is the true ally of emptiness. When people withdraw from responsibility, emptiness expands. When they step into even small obligations, meaning quietly returns, not as a feeling, as a structure. A life organized around responsibility does not eliminate pain, but it prevents collapse, because it restores a fundamental psychological truth. You are still needed. Life still expects something from you. And as long as that is true, your existence retains meaning, even when it does not feel like it. Modern culture often defines freedom as the absence of constraints. To be free is to choose whatever feels right, whenever one wants. Viktor Frankl fundamentally rejected this definition. For Frankl, freedom without responsibility is not liberation, it is disorientation. True freedom is not the ability to escape obligation, but the capacity to respond, to life, to circumstance, to necessity. The word responsibility itself reveals this. Responsibility. The ability to respond appropriately to what life demands. Frankl argued that humans are never completely free from conditions. We are shaped by biology, psychology, and social forces. But within these limits, a margin of freedom always remains. Not freedom of situation, freedom of stance. This distinction is crucial when everything feels empty. People often interpret emptiness as a loss of freedom. They feel trapped by routines, by obligations, by expectations. Frankl would say the opposite. Emptiness often comes from too much undirected freedom. When no clear demand exists, the psyche floats without anchor. This is why the absence of structure, not oppression, often leads to despair. Unlimited choice does not create meaning. It creates paralysis. Frankl believed that life is not a playground of preferences, but a field of responsibilities. Each situation limits freedom in one way, while opening it in another. Even in Auschwitz, where external freedom was nearly erased, inner freedom remained. Frankl described prisoners who chose dignity over degradation, kindness over cruelty, meaning over despair. Not because they controlled their fate, but because they controlled their response. This reframes freedom entirely. You are free not when you can do anything, but when you can choose how to answer what you cannot change. This idea challenges the modern instinct to eliminate all constraints. Constraints are not enemies of meaning. They define it. Without resistance, direction disappears. Without demand, purpose dissolves. Frankl argued that responsibility gives freedom its shape. It channels energy towards something real. This is why people who avoid responsibility in the name of freedom often feel emptier than those burdened by obligation. Obligation, when aligned with meaning, does not imprison, it grounds. The empty person often says, "I feel stuck." Frankl would ask, "What are you being called to answer that you are avoiding?" Because emptiness is rarely the absence of options. It is the avoidance of a demand. Meaning emerges when freedom is used in service of necessity, not escape from it. This perspective restores dignity. You are not a victim of circumstances, nor are you an isolated chooser inventing meaning arbitrarily. You are a responder, situated, limited, and still accountable. And this accountability is not oppressive, it is stabilizing. When you know what is required of you, even suffering gains structure. Freedom becomes the ability to remain aligned with meaning under pressure. Not the freedom to feel good, the freedom to remain faithful to what matters. And this kind of freedom does not vanish in emptiness. It becomes visible there. Viktor Frankl was careful when speaking about love. He did not reduce it to emotion, romance, or attachment. For Frankl, love is an act of perception. To love is to see another person not as they are now, but as they could become. In the camps, Frankl made a discovery that contradicted every material explanation of survival. He noticed that prisoners who held a vivid inner image of someone they loved, a spouse, a child, a parent, often endured conditions that should have broken them. Not because love removed hunger or pain, but because it gave suffering a direction. Frankl wrote that love is the ultimate and highest goal to which man can aspire, not because it makes life pleasant, but because it anchors existence beyond the self. This is crucial when everything feels empty. Emptiness thrives in isolation, not physical isolation, but existential isolation. A person may be surrounded by others and still feel unseen, unnecessary, interchangeable. Frankl observed that meaning collapses when the individual feels that their existence makes no difference to anyone. Love counters this collapse, not through dependency, but through significance. To be loved means your existence matters to someone beyond utility. But Frankl went further. He argued that meaning is not only found in being loved, but in loving responsibly. Love is not possession. It is commitment to the inner potential of another human being. This reframes relationships entirely. The question is no longer, what do I receive from this person? But what is being asked of me through this person? Even in absence, love can remain meaningful. Frankl described moments in Auschwitz when he would imagine conversations with his wife, not knowing whether she was alive. He realized something profound. Love transcends physical presence. It exists as an orientation of the soul. This is why loss, when processed through love, does not annihilate meaning. It transforms it. The memory of someone loved does not empty life. It deepens responsibility toward life. Frankl warned that modern culture often confuses love with emotional gratification. When feelings fade, relationships are abandoned, and meaning fractures. But love grounded in responsibility does not dissolve when emotion fluctuates. It persists as a stance. This has direct implications for emptiness. When a person feels empty, they often withdraw from relationships, believing they have nothing to offer. Frankl would say the opposite. Meaning often returns through giving, not receiving, through listening instead of speaking, through presence instead of performance, through fidelity instead of excitement. Love demands that we step outside the self, even when the self feels depleted. And paradoxically, this outward movement restores inner substance. Frankl emphasized that no one can replace another human being in the meaning they carry for us. Each person represents a unique, unrepeatable call. When you answer that call, even imperfectly, you participate in something that cannot be erased by suffering. This is why love is not fragile. It is demanding. And demands, as Frankl repeatedly showed, are what protect the psyche from collapse. When everything else is stripped away, status, certainty, comfort, plans, the ability to stand for another human being remains a final source of meaning. Not because it feels good, but because it answers life's deepest question. Does your existence extend beyond yourself? When the answer is yes, emptiness loses its absolute power. Viktor Frankl described conscience in a way that sharply diverges from modern thinking. He did not see it as a social construct, nor as an internalized set of rules. For Frankl, conscience is an organ of perception. Just as the eye perceives light and the ear perceives sound, conscience perceives meaning. This idea carries a serious implication. Meaning is not invented, it is detected. And detection requires attention. Frankl argued that emptiness often arises not because meaning is absent, but because conscience is being ignored. Modern life trains people to override conscience, to rationalize, to adapt, to silence discomfort in the name of convenience. But conscience does not shout, it whispers. And when it is repeatedly ignored, the signal weakens. This is how emptiness deepens. People often say they feel lost, but what they really mean is that they no longer trust their inner orientation. Frankl warned that when conscience is treated as an obstacle to comfort rather than a guide to meaning, psychological disintegration follows. Because conscience does not exist to make life easier, it exists to make life true. This is uncomfortable. Conscience often demands what is inconvenient, unpopular, or personally costly. It rarely aligns with immediate pleasure. This is why emptiness frequently appears after a long series of compromises, small betrayals of values justified as necessary, harmless, or temporary. Frankl observed that people do not lose meaning suddenly. They erode it gradually. Each ignored demand. Each avoided responsibility. Each act of self-deception dulls the organ that detects meaning. Eventually, the individual feels nothing, not peace, but numbness. This numbness is often misinterpreted as depression or fatigue alone, but at its core, it is disorientation. Frankl emphasized that conscience is situational, not abstract. It does not deliver universal rules. It responds to concrete moments. What is right for one person in one situation may be wrong for another in a different context. This makes conscience fragile and demanding. It requires courage to listen to it because it cannot be outsourced. No authority can answer life for you. No ideology can replace personal responsibility. This is why Frankl believed that suppressing conscience in the name of conformity is one of the fastest paths to existential emptiness. When individuals stop asking, "What is required of me here?" they lose contact with meaning. Conscience restores direction not by explaining life, but by pointing toward the next responsible action. Often small, often unnoticed, often difficult. Frankl insisted that meaning is always available, but not always comfortable, and conscience is the instrument that reveals it. When emptiness dominates, the solution is rarely more stimulation, affirmation, or distraction. It is silence, attention, honest listening, not to feelings, but to demands. The more a person realigns with conscience, the clearer meaning becomes, not as certainty, as orientation. And orientation, even without emotional relief, stabilizes the psyche. This is why Frankl saw conscience not as a moral burden, but as a lifeline. Ignore it long enough, and life feels empty. Respond to it, even imperfectly, and meaning begins to reappear, quietly, persistently, real. One of the most misunderstood expectations about meaning is the belief that it will feel like relief. Viktor Frankl never promised that finding meaning would dissolve emptiness overnight. In fact, he warned against expecting emotional resolution as proof of meaning. Meaning does not anesthetize the human condition. It structures it. This distinction is critical. Many people abandon the search for meaning because the emptiness does not disappear immediately. They assume something has failed. Frankl would say, "Nothing failed. You simply misunderstood the function of meaning. Meaning does not remove tension. It gives tension direction. A life without tension is not peaceful. It is flat. And flatness is experienced psychologically as emptiness." Frankl argued that mental health does not come from equilibrium, but from dynamic tension, the pull between what one is and what one is called to become. When meaning enters, the void does not vanish. It becomes oriented. Suffering still hurts. Fatigue still exists. Uncertainty remains. But these experiences are no longer meaningless. This is why people with meaning can endure long periods of difficulty without collapse, while those without meaning break under far lighter pressure. Frankl observed that despair is not caused by pain itself, but by the conviction that pain serves no purpose. When that conviction changes, pain changes quality. It no longer feels infinite. It no longer feels arbitrary. Meaning draws boundaries around suffering. This is profoundly stabilizing. The empty person often believes something is wrong because life still feels heavy after choosing responsibility, conscience, or commitment. Frankl would say, "Life is heavy. Meaning does not make it light, it makes it worth carrying." This reframes expectations. You are not meant to feel constantly fulfilled. You are meant to feel needed. Meaning does not promise happiness. It promises significance. And significance is quieter than pleasure, but far more durable. Frankl emphasized that meaning is not a destination reached once and for all. It must be rediscovered repeatedly, moment by moment. This is why emptiness may return, even in a meaningful life. Its return does not invalidate what you have built. It signals a new question being asked. Life does not stop demanding responses. It evolves, and meaning evolves with it. Frankl warned against interpreting the return of emptiness as regression. It is often transition. A previous answer no longer fits the present situation. The danger lies not in feeling empty again, but in responding to emptiness with withdrawal instead of engagement. Meaning grows through continued participation in life, even when emotional feedback is minimal. This is mature meaning, not enthusiasm, not certainty, not constant motivation, but fidelity to responsibility in the absence of reassurance. Frankl believed that this fidelity is what preserves inner freedom. When you remain aligned with meaning, even the void becomes survivable, not comfortable, but inhabitable. And a life that can be inhabited, even under strain, does not collapse into despair. It stands. Viktor Frankl never offered a life without emptiness. He offered a life capable of bearing it. This distinction defines his entire philosophy. The human condition includes uncertainty, loss, boredom, suffering, and doubt. Any framework that promises permanent fulfillment is not realistic. It is escapist. Frankl's contribution was not optimism, but orientation. He showed that meaning is not a mood to be maintained, but a stance to be lived. When everything feels empty, the task is not to eliminate the feeling, but to refuse to let it define the direction of life. Meaning does not compete with emptiness. It coexists with it. This is what makes Frankl's thought psychologically durable. A person oriented by meaning does not ask, how can I feel better, but how can I remain responsible in this moment? This shift stabilizes identity. You are no longer at the mercy of internal states. You are anchored to external demands. Frankl believed that life retains meaning under all circumstances, not because circumstances are fair, but because response is always possible, even in limitation, even in decline, even near the end. This is why he insisted that life never loses its demand on the individual. As long as you are alive, life is asking something of you, not necessarily something heroic, often something ordinary: to endure with dignity, to remain honest, to care for another, to complete a task faithfully, to suffer without becoming bitter. These responses are not small, they are final. Frankl warned against the modern temptation to measure life by intensity or excitement. A meaningful life may look quiet from the outside, unimpressive, routine, but internally it is structured, and structure protects the psyche. When emptiness appears, and it will, it no longer signals collapse. It signals the next question. This is the ultimate resilience, Frankl observed, not the absence of despair, but the refusal to surrender meaning to it. Meaning is not something you possess, it is something you enact, every day, every situation. And when you live this way, emptiness loses its absolute authority. It may still visit, it may linger, but it no longer decides who you are. You remain a responder, a participant, a being whose existence still matters, not because life feels full, but because it is answered. This is how Viktor Frankl understood the search for meaning, not as a solution to emptiness, but as a way of standing upright within it. And that, he believed, is enough to sustain a human life.